After Arda, of which Middle-earth is a part, was created, many powerful beings came into this newly formed world. Among these countless spirits, 15 were far more powerful than the rest. They had names, and each possessed unique gifts. Among these 15, known as the Valar, there was one who always saw himself apart from the others. He dedicated himself to undoing what the others had created, for he desired the whole world to belong to him alone. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Middle-earth. I'm your guide. I am Guide of Middle-earth, and today I'll be telling you the story of the being who would later be known as Melkor, the black foe of the world. At the very beginning, there was only Eru, also called Ilúvatar. He first created the Ainur, the Holy Ones. These were the children of his thought. Before anything was brought into existence, he spoke to them and offered them melodies. They sang before him, because music and song were the foundations of all creation. For a time, they sang alone. And as they did, they began to understand the part of Eru's mind they came from. They matured by learning about their siblings. But among them was one who was impatient, the one who would later be called Melkor. Melkor had been gifted the greatest power and knowledge among the Ainur. He had been given a share of every other being's gifts. He looked into the void and burned with the desire to create. Often, he wandered the nothingness, seeking the flame imperishable. But the void offered him no answers. It seemed to ignore him. He never found the flame, because it dwelled only with Ilúvatar. He drifted further from his brethren, becoming lost in his own thoughts. Then, in the timeless halls where no hours passed, Ilúvatar gathered all the Ainur. He believed they had matured enough. He gave them a musical theme and asked them to create music. Each Ainur sang in harmony with their strength. This became known as the Ainulindale, the music of the Ainur. But Melkor's melody was chaotic and discordant, mirroring his mind. Eventually, other Ainur were drawn to his song, and the harmony fractured into a sea of noise. Ilúvatar stopped the music and started it anew. Yet Melkor's disruption returned. When Ilúvatar began the music a third time, the theme was so powerful that it absorbed even Melkor's dissonance and wove it into a greater harmony. Then Ilúvatar spoke. Mighty are the Ainur, and among them you are the mightiest, Melkor. But you shall see that no theme may be played that does not have its deepest roots in me, and you cannot make music outside of mine. He then revealed to them the shape their music had formed in the void. Before them appeared a vision of a world. Ilúvatar used the flame imperishable to give that vision reality. He told the Ainur that any who wished could enter this world and carry out its unfolding. This world was created for his children, the elves and men. At first the Valar made the world radiant and beautiful. The earth resembled a garden of paradise. But as Melkor's envy and wrath grew, the form he took in the world darkened and became dreadful. Though he descended to Arda clothed in majesty, his inner fury dimmed that radiance. He became a flame of destruction. Even before the days were counted, the first war broke out between Melkor and the Valar. At first, Melkor was victorious. The strength of the beginning was still with him. But then another spirit descended to Arda, and the world shook with his laughter. This was Tulkas. Melkor could not withstand his might and fled into the void, watching his enemies from afar. This marked the spring of Arda. The Valar built 2 great lamps, one in the north, one in the south, to bring light to Middle-earth. Their seeds began to bloom. But Melkor watched from the shadows, and he hated all of it. In secret, he returned to the north of Middle-earth and built a fortress deep underground. It was named Utumno. The Valar did not notice. The northern lamp's light cast long shadows that hid Melkor's darkness. He grew in power. Evil spirits gathered around him. Even some Maiar joined his cause. Among them was Sauron. Then, in a sudden assault, Melkor destroyed the two great lamps. He retreated into the depths of Utumno. The Valar were faced with a choice: stop the destruction or pursue Melkor. They chose to save the world first. After healing the land, the Valar withdrew to the west, to Aman, where they established their own realm. In doing so, they left much of Middle-earth to Melkor. It was more than he had ever hoped for. Melkor took full advantage. With Sauron by his side, he built another fortress in the northwest of Middle-earth, Angband. While Melkor remained in Utumno, Sauron ruled Angband. Thus, for a long time, Middle-earth was left under the shadow of Melkor's will. When Ilúvatar's children, the elves, finally awoke, the world was still in this state. The Valar remained in Aman, living beneath the light of the two trees. Middle-earth had only the light of the stars and the presence of Melkor. He was the first to discover the awakening elves, and he hated them above all else. For Ilúvatar had said they would be the fairest of all beings. Melkor captured them in the dark, brought them to Utumno, and twisted them through pain and torment. From them, he created the orcs. For Melkor could never create, only corrupt. Yet even he ignored one truth. The extraordinary power Ilúvatar had given him was not endless. Though it did not run out quickly, Melkor used so much of it to destroy and corrupt that over time he weakened. The great strength he once had would slowly fade. But at this point in history, Melkor still believed himself invincible. Eventually, the Valar could no longer ignore his presence. They realized his influence was too destructive. This led to the War of Powers. The Valar attacked Utumno with all their might. Melkor could not withstand them. Utumno was utterly destroyed. Melkor was bound with a chain called Angainor. His second fortress, Angband, was left untouched. The Valar deemed it unimportant. Sauron remained free. Melkor was brought in chains before the Valar. At the feet of the mountains of Aman, he begged for forgiveness. But none was offered, not by the Valar, and not by the elves. Melkor was condemned to the halls of Mandos, where he would be imprisoned for 3 ages. Thus began the years of Melkor's imprisonment. What exactly he did during his time in the halls of Mandos is unknown. But after 3 ages, as promised, he was brought once more before the Valar. By then, the elves, for whom the Valar had once waged war, had come to Aman. They now lived there in splendor and bliss. When Melkor saw this, a deep envy took root in his heart. Seeing the children of Ilúvatar dwell so close to the Valar filled him with bitterness. What caught his attention most during this time were the radiant jewels crafted by the elves, the Silmarils. He desired them greatly, but he concealed his intentions, for he was also known as the Lord of Lies. Standing before the Valar, Melkor no longer bore the terrifying form he had during Mandos's judgment. Instead, he wore the guise of someone humble, repentant and wiser from past mistakes. Yet within him, a storm raged. The peace of the elves only fueled his thirst for revenge. One of Melkor's greatest powers was not just strength, but knowledge. It gave him a cunning that no other possessed. When needed, he would cast aside his true name and take on a form that others wished to see. This is exactly what he did in the presence of Manwë. To Manwë he appeared as a remorseful spirit. He bowed low, humbling himself, professing deep regret for the evil he had done. He swore to labor tirelessly to repair the damage he had caused to the world. And so, on the condition that he would never return to Middle-earth, he was pardoned. He was granted freedom. But this decision was like letting a wolf loose among sheep. For in Aman, the elves had never known war or bloodshed. They had neither swords nor armor. It didn't take Melkor long to realize just how innocent the elves were, especially the Noldor, who, like him, loved to craft and create. They were deeply curious about Melkor's vast knowledge. One of Melkor's greatest powers was not just strength, but knowledge. It gave him a cunning that no other possessed. When needed, he would cast aside his true name and take on a form that others wished to see. This is exactly what he did in the presence of Manwë. To Manwë, he appeared as a remorseful spirit. He bowed low, humbling himself, professing deep regret for the evil he had done. He swore to labor tirelessly to repair the damage he had caused to the world. And so, on the condition that he would never return to Middle-earth, he was pardoned. He was granted freedom. But this decision was like letting a wolf loose among sheep. For in Aman, the elves had never known war or bloodshed. They had neither swords nor armor. It didn't take Melkor long to realize just how innocent the elves were, especially the Noldor, who, like him, loved to craft and create. They were deeply curious about Melkor's vast knowledge. Among the Noldor, one in particular caught his eye, Feanor. From the first moment Melkor saw him, and the Silmarils he had crafted with his own hands, he became obsessed. He began subtly influencing the Noldor. His goal, to drive a wedge between the Valar and the elves. In time, the Noldor grew more receptive to his words. Melkor wove his sinister ideas so artfully into charming and persuasive speech that his listeners often mistook them for their own thoughts. He accused the Valar of envying the elves. "They fear your greatness," he said. "They wish to control you. Soon, men will arrive, beings they can dominate more easily than you. That is why they want you out of the way." He spread such rumors everywhere. At one point, he even introduced weapons to the elves, teaching them the art of forging swords. He worked tirelessly to sow discord, especially between Feanor and his half-brother, Fingolfin, and he succeeded. Tensions among the Noldor rose. Feanor began to speak openly against the Valar. But as with every serpent, the day came when Melkor's lies were exposed. Realizing his time was short, Melkor vanished before he could be seized. No one could find him. He had not yet returned to Middle-earth, for his work was not yet finished. His mind was still fixed on the Silmarils. From hiding, he sought out the exiled Feanor, urging him to rebel against the Valar. Perhaps he might have succeeded, but then he made the mistake of mentioning the Silmarils. Feanor saw through his disguise and cast him out. "Begone! You're nothing but a prison bird from Mandos." These words cut deeper than any sword. Melkor never forgot the insult. Yet he also knew he could no longer act alone. Far to the south, in a land of deep shadow where no light from the trees reached, dwelled a monstrous spider named Ungoliant. Melkor shed all pretenses. He returned to his terrible, dreadful form, a shape he would now keep forever. He made a pact with Ungoliant. She would help him, and he would feed her hunger. So, under a cloak of pure darkness spun by Ungoliant, they crept into Aman. A great feast was being held, and all were gathered in celebration. Hidden by shadows, they approached the two trees. With a black spear, Melkor struck the trees, and Ungoliant drank their lifeblood. The trees withered. Aemon was plunged into darkness once more, but Melkor's greed had not yet been satisfied. He went to Feanor's house, murdered him, and stole the Silmarils. However, the chest that held them was not with him. When he clasped the gems in his bare hands, they burned his flesh. But he refused to let them go. He fled. Ungoliant, having grown enormous from her feast, now turned on Melkor and demanded the Silmarils. She wrapped him in her webs. For the first time, Melkor screamed in true terror. His cry echoed through the world. The Balrogs, hearing his call, came to his aid. With fiery whips, they drove Ungoliant away. Thus Melkor, perhaps for the first time since his existence began, narrowly escaped true destruction. He returned to Angband, where Sauron and the Balrogs had been preparing for his arrival. From this point forward, a long and bitter struggle between Melkor and the elves would begin. The Valar were shaken to their core, not only by the darkening of the two trees, but also by the spilling of elven blood and the flight of Feanor's kin to Middle-earth. Because of this, they hesitated to intervene directly in the conflict between Melkor and the elves. And so, the Valar chose not to take part in the struggle that was unfolding. Melkor wasted no time after returning to Angband. He launched a surprise attack on the greatest elven kingdom then standing in Middle-earth. But it must be noted, after his return to Angband, Melkor rarely left his fortress, and he never led an army in person. This first battle was launched without proper preparation. As a result, Melkor's entire orc army was annihilated. Still, for him, this was merely a test, a rehearsal. At that time, Feanor and the Noldor, who had set out in pursuit of Melkor, arrived in Middle-earth. Feanor, driven by fury, immediately charged into battle. Thus came the second battle. Once again, Melkor's forces were utterly destroyed. But Melkor's true goal was never just to win battles. By the battle's end, Feanor, consumed by rage, had broken away from his army with only a few companions. And for this, he paid the ultimate price. He was mortally wounded by Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs, and died shortly after. After this event, Melkor took on a new name, Morgoth, the Black Foe of the World. And it was under this name that history would remember him forever. But just then, something happened that Morgoth had never anticipated. Something that struck fear into his heart. First, the moon rose into the sky, and then the sun, in all its radiant glory, followed. It was the sun that terrified Morgoth most, for the evil within him had long since spread across the world, diluting his power, binding his strength to the very earth. Now, he could no longer leave his fortress to walk freely. Against the sun, he had no strength, no courage. Instead, he shrouded Angband in smoke and shadow, retreating deep within. This withdrawal would last centuries. In those long years, the Noldor settled in the western lands of Middle-earth known as Beleriand. Morgoth saw this, and his hatred only deepened. In the third battle, he once again tested his enemy's strength, and once again he was defeated. But Morgoth would not stop. He bred more orcs, spawned even fouler creatures in the dark. Deep in Angband, he shaped his most fearsome beasts, the first dragons, using methods unknown to any save himself. After centuries of silence, Morgoth struck with terrifying force. He broke the defenses of Beleriand like a hammer. This was the fourth battle, a campaign of fire and devastation. Its most legendary moment came when Fingolfin, now High King of the Noldor after Feanor's death, stood alone before the gates of Angband and challenged Morgoth to single combat. Morgoth could not refuse. He emerged in his blackest form, towering over Fingolfin, twice his size, wielding the mighty hammer Grond. This was the only time Morgoth ever fought in single combat. Each swing of Grond smashed craters into the earth, but Fingolfin was swift. He wounded Morgoth 7 times. Morgoth's screams echoed so fearfully that even his own orcs trembled in terror. In the end, of course, Morgoth triumphed. Fingolfin grew weary. Morgoth crushed him beneath his foot, but with his final breath, Fingolfin dealt Morgoth one last blow, a wound that would torment him until the end of his days. Fingolfin fell. Morgoth sought to throw his body to the wolves, but the great eagle Thorondor, servant of the Valar, descended from the skies. He slashed Morgoth's face, seized Fingolfin's body, and flew away. Through all these events, the Silmarils remained in Morgoth's iron crown. But even that wouldn't last. One day, as Morgoth sat on his dark throne, a woman entered his hall. Her beauty stirred something long forgotten, a dangerous desire. Thinking she had come to offer herself, he allowed her to speak. But instead, she began to sing. Her voice was magic. Morgoth's eyes grew heavy, his mind clouded. He fell into a deep sleep. When he awoke, one of the Silmarils was gone. The woman was Luthien, and the wolf who had accompanied her was Beren in disguise. This fleeting moment of desire, Morgoth's single lapse, would, centuries later, set into motion the events that would lead to his downfall. Melkor's evil grew greater and greater. Over time, not only the elves but also men, the second-born, fell under his shadow. Among them, Melkor found allies and servants. Thus, his power spread even further, and he launched yet another great war. In this war, the armies of men who were friends of the elves and the Valar were utterly defeated. Almost the entire land of Beleriand fell into Melkor's hands. Only a few kingdoms remained that could still stand against him. One of them was Gondolin. But Melkor was determined to destroy that as well. During this time, one of Melkor's cruelest amusements was to release prisoners, both trees and men, whom he had held captive for long periods, just to watch the chaos they would cause once freed. One of these was a man named Hurin. We won't go into detail about his story in this video, but the chain of events that followed his release would ultimately lead to the downfall of both Dor-lómin and Gondolin. Eventually, no kingdoms remained to oppose Melkor. His victory seemed certain, inevitable even, but that would not be his end. For across the seas a sailor named Erendil, who had long sought a way to reach the Valar, finally succeeded. Carrying one of the Silmarils, he crossed the vast ocean. On behalf of both elves and men, he pleaded for aid. His prayer did not go unanswered. At last, the Valar rose again. Thus began the War of Wrath. The Valar sent forth a mighty host to Middle-earth, one of the greatest armies in all of Arda's history. They descended upon Melkor's forces with divine fury. Melkor threw everything he had into the battle. Every orc, every balrog, every dragon. But even this was not enough to stop the tide. His power was so drained that he could no longer even step onto the battlefield himself. In the end, he was found hiding in the deepest pit of Angband. There was no forgiveness. His feet were cut off, his iron crown turned into a collar, and once again he was bound with the chain Angenor. Melkor, known now and forever as Morgoth, was an Ainur, and though his body could be destroyed, his spirit could not. So he was cast out into the void beyond the world. It is said that at the end of time, Melkor will return once more, and the final battle will be fought. In that battle, the one destined to slay him is said to be Turin Turambar. But this is only a prophecy. Its truth remains uncertain. So, my friends, today we've explored the rise and fall of Melkor, also known as Morgoth, the black foe of the world. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more. That's all for today. Stay safe, stay well. Until next time.